Well, everybody, this right here is the Lenovo Slim 7i Aura Edition. And if you remember, we actually used this laptop as part of our Lunar Lake launch day coverage. And back then, I promised you a complete review on it. And that's exactly what's happening here. But I'm going to do this one a little bit differently. So what we did is we actually went out and bought a brand new Slim 7i Aura Edition, but in this case, it's with the Ultra 7 256V instead of the 258V that we used when we originally reviewed this device. So in the last month, I've basically been using this as my daily driver, both here at the office, at home, and on a bunch of trips that I've taken. So how did this laptop hold up after all that time? Not only that, is the 258V actually worth the upgrade price over the 256V that I have right here? And one other thing, were there any long-term issues that I encountered with Lunar Lake still in its infancy? Well, straight from day one, the Aura Edition has been one of the more affordable Lunar Lake laptops when it's equipped with the Ultra 7 256V, especially when you consider alternatives like the ZenBook S14 and 16 are often hundreds of dollars more. As a result, this has become pretty popular, at least among this newer laptop generation. The first thing I noticed when ordering this device is, well, I gotta give Lenovo a little bit of credit here. Their upgrade options are really well priced, with the 32GB Ultra 7 258V being a $100 premium and a 1TB SSD at just $42. And to me, even though I bought the entry-level 16GB version for this video, both of those upgrades are pretty much no-brainers. Port selection is also pretty good, but right in line with other thin and light laptops in this category. It's headlined by a pair of Thunderbolt 4 ports, one of which you'll actually lose when the laptop's charging. So when I use it at my desk, I tend to plug it into a Thunderbolt dock for extra connectivity. But what you won't see here is an OLED display option, since that's reserved for other regions outside of North America. But what we get with the IPS panel is still really good. Personally, I think it's one of the best displays I've ever seen on a sub $1,500, 15 or even 16-inch laptop for that matter. Sure, it's not quite as punchy as an OLED, but color reproduction is almost perfect in Lenovo's P3 photography mode, and it gets very bright if you actually need that. And look, I want to stick with the screen for a couple of seconds here because on paper, it's absolutely perfect. It's beautiful, high refresh rate, everything you could possibly want in a 16-inch laptop screen if you're not shopping for an OLED. But personally, this is my personal standpoint, you might not agree, but look, I've been using this thing and I typically don't like glossy screens. And this one is just like mirror-like in its reflectivity. There's absolutely no anti-reflective coating on it. And I use it in a broad range of environments. I've used it in coffee shops, I've used it in airport terminals, even here at the office. In any well-lit environment, this thing, it becomes a major nuisance. There's additional eye strain. You can actually see your fingers as you type, which creates a pretty big distraction. And since you need to boost brightness to counteract those reflections, I constantly found battery life being well below what we actually tested. Windows laptop manufacturers need an option like Apple's Nano Texture for people like me who use their devices in a wide range of environments. And speaking of battery life, well, we've already established that Lunar Lake laptops are the battery life champion. That's because Intel has found a way and they've managed to combine ultra high efficiency with very low power consumption in those semi-idle scenarios that a lot of thin and light laptops typically find themselves in. And this Slim 7i Aura Edition with its Ultra 7 256V actually got slightly better overall battery life than the 258V in all of our tests. In some situations, it was pretty extreme too, almost an hour and a half in local video playback, while web browsing also saw a nice bump of just over 70 minutes. Meanwhile, online video streaming didn't see all that much difference between the 32 and 16GB models, likely because additional CPU resources are being used here. The same thing goes for our heavy load test. Since both Yogas have identical power levels, they get virtually identical results. But look, while those numbers look really good, we can't forget those are done in a closed lab environment. What I wanted to do is I wanted to approach this as a little bit more of a real-world usage scenario. So what I did is I took this laptop with me during a recent business trip and I logged battery consumption over multiple days. So basically what I did is I used the laptop on battery, sleep cycles, everything else for every single day, and I ran it down to 5%. And in every case, the Yoga was able to stay away from a charger for at least 2 days, sometimes even more. That first cycle was the longest since it involved a fairly long red-eye flight while being disconnected from Wi-Fi with the screen at less than 50% brightness. Meanwhile, the next day was a blend of mixed and heavier use, along with a lot of time maxing out the screen's brightness since I was working in a very well-lit space. Even then, the laptop made it to a third day. The other 2 2 cycles were the best reflection of my normal everyday habits, with a mix of browsing and YouTube uploads, along with a lot of Excel and Google Docs use. Even then, the Aura Edition got just under 2 working days without ever needing a charge. Another thing you'll notice is battery drain during the laptop's sleep cycles is almost non-existent. In most cases, it showed a drain of less than 2% while sleeping overnight and until I started work the next day. A lot of people wanted to know if Lunar Lake exhibits the same phantom power draw as previous Intel CPUs, and the answer is no, at least not in my time with it. And at this point, I'm pretty sure you're coming to understand that I've put this thing through the ringer in the last month. And you know what? It actually still looks pretty brand new. I don't know if you can see this on camera, but it's held up better than almost any laptop that I've come across in the last 2 years. In most respects, Lenovo's build quality and durability are a pretty solid notch above what similarly priced Windows laptops offer. There's little to no body flex, which is likely due to the magnesium alloy frame that's reinforced the aluminum outer shell. Lenovo also applied a new coating which does an amazing job at repelling fingerprints and resisting scratches. Honestly, most laptops I use look like a CSI crime scene after I've gone a day with them, but not this one. I mean, look at how it holds up after a week of use versus a ZenBook 14 that I was using for a single day. What I've also come to realize, and maybe you're gonna say, well, of course, Mike, is that just because a laptop says that it's thin and light, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy to cart around, because this thing in the 15.3-inch form factor is what I would call a little bit more cumbersome than other Intel Evo based laptops that are in the 13 and 14-inch categories. I mean, it fits just fine into my backpack, but my personal preference tends to lean towards 14-inch models since they're more compact horizontally, making them infinitely easier to live with. And the Aura Edition's size in relation to how light it is also means there's a bare minimum of weight holding it down when you try to open the top cover. So it simply can't be done with a single hand. And while not being able to open this cover with one hand is like a minor inconvenience, there is a huge positive aspect to that. And that's the fact that Lenovo has manufactured and engineered one of the most solid laptop hinges of any laptop in the thin and light category. And look, you can ask anybody here at the office, I pound on the keyboards of my laptops like they owe me money. And this thing, it hardly wobbles at all. Like I said, it's one of the first that has actually held up to that. But speaking of keyboards, you guys probably all know this right now, is that I come from the other side of the Lenovo coin. That is the ThinkPad X1 Carbon side. And everybody should know by now that keyboard, to me, on those devices is the GOAT of any laptop keyboard. And this one, on the Yoga Slim 7i Aura Edition, it actually holds up pretty well when compared to that one. And that makes complete sense because Lenovo has updated this one by augmenting throw distance, improving the actuation points, and optimizing feedback. And they might physically look the same, but the Aura Edition's keyboard is on a whole different level when compared to the Slim 7i from 2022. But the typing experience isn't perfect, and it isn't the keyboard's fault at all. It's the darn trackpads, because while this is otherwise a great feeling trackpad, the problem is, believe it or not, the size. I can't tell you how many times I was typing, had the text inadvertently highlighted by a perceived trackpad touch, and boom, it was all gone. Okay, with that rant over, I want to sort of like switch gears a little bit here, because there's a few other things that need to be discussed about this laptop, and the first of those is the speakers. They actually run right along the sides. While I found myself using headphones most of the time, these things, you put them among a crowd of people, like here at the office, you turn them up to like 50%, and immediately everybody says, whoa, that's actually pretty impressive for a thin and light laptop. And once the Slim 7i Aura Edition is opened, it seems those speakers tend to take up quite a bit of space. There's a few other things going on here too, like an almost complete lack of upgrade options. Since Lunar Lake CPUs integrate memory directly onto their packages, the only thing that's user upgradable here is the SSD. The one installed here is a 4-lane PCIe Gen 4 Samsung PM9B1 using a 2230 form factor, and upgrading that to 1 or even 2 terabytes will cost a ton of money right now. That's why I'd highly recommend maximizing the Aura Edition's SSD capacity right from when you order it. Now we also need to talk about the webcam and microphone array, because on paper at least, This thing is everything you could possibly want for video conferencing. You have a 1080p Full HD sensor for the webcam along with IR technology, and a 4 microphone array with hardware-based noise cancelling. The reality, however, I'd call it a little bit more mixed. The microphone array, it really does live up to expectations. These things are pretty clear. They cut down on the background noise here at the office very, very well. But the webcam, to me, that's middle of the pack. The colors, contrast, black levels, they're all decent. But because of that glass coating, the lens flare becomes a problem. You can actually see some right there. Right there. Also, because of the webcam's positioning right in the middle of the lip that's used to open the laptop, you'll always find fingerprints everywhere, and I mean everywhere around this thing. My advice, guys, carry one of these things around. Microfiber cloth every once in a while. Wipe that thing. That's the best you can hope for. Another thing I noticed is even after updating to the latest versions of Vantage and Windows, the NPU accelerated webcam studio effects were never available. It's the first modern laptop I've seen without this option, and it carries through to 3 different Aura Edition laptops we have here at the office. And that leads me to some of the other issues that I've had when using this device. And yeah, I'm laughing, but it's just Windows being Windows. So many problems that we've had with the over 100 laptops that we've seen here at the office in the last 2 years are just problems with the software, not necessarily with the hardware. It's like Windows 11 just feels like, I don't know, a piece of software that's attached to the amazing hardware with a stick and 2 pieces of bubblegum just holding everything together. So first of all, there were random BSODs that popped up maybe like 1 out of every 20 times when I turned off Bluetooth. There was 0 indication of what was causing it. It was just a blue screen with no error message whatsoever. The other thing that I encountered is just randomly again, whenever I plugged in my monitor here at the office to this device, Windows just failed to recognize it. I need to do a full system reboot. And the last thing is, seriously, Microsoft, what is this? Why is there pixelation in my settings? What is this? Another interesting thing I noticed is how installing Intel's latest GPU drivers, ones that supposedly increase the ARC 140V's performance, actually cut frame rates in a lot of games we test. Meanwhile, the ones on Lenovo's website, which are much, much older by comparison, give the best GPU optimizations. Either way, one of Lenovo's main focuses with the Aura Edition is to simply deliver a really good overall user experience. So we have to talk about thermals here, because the last thing anybody wants when they're using a laptop is to have a hot running, loud device sitting on their laps while they're using it. And from my time with it, the Yoga stayed cool to the touch, and outside of Windows updates, I can't even remember a single time when I heard the fan running. But then again, I never really used it in any intensive workload scenarios. And even in those heavy workloads, the Yoga's exterior shell, and most importantly, the typing area, didn't get hot to the touch. And if you jack things up to the highest performance mode and hit it with one of those all-core workloads, well, temperatures and noise do tend to rise, but it never gets to the point of being uncomfortable in any way. The internal cooling assembly is pretty well designed too, since CPU temperatures never went above 72 degrees. Meanwhile, in gaming, things do tend to take a little step upwards again, but these are still some of the lowest temperatures and acoustics we've seen from a laptop in this class. And how does that translate to overall performance? Well, yes, we did review Lunar Lake and the Ultra 7 258V in our Lunar Lake launch video, but this is a little bit different here because functionally, the 258V and 256V, other than having different memory capacities, are functionally the same. The laptop, this laptop at least, versus the one that we reviewed with the 32GB CPU, they're basically identical. So you would think that performance would be the same too. Well, that didn't really happen. In lightly threaded apps, there really weren't any meaningful differences with the two setups running neck and neck. But remember, all these Microsoft productivity apps barely need minimum system resources to even run. And the same thing goes for single-threaded Cinebench numbers. The two laptops and their respective CPUs are literal carbon copies of one another. But when you jump into more intensive workloads, the Ultra 7 256V actually takes a backseat to the 258V, even in apps that aren't memory capacity limited. Some of this, well, it could be due to sample-to-sample variance that can affect component performance. We've actually seen deltas in the past of 5 to 7% on otherwise identical desktop CPUs, so it only makes sense that those numbers would translate to the laptop side too. There are some other apps that do benefit from 32 gigabytes more than others, like Lightroom and Photoshop, and in those the 258V has a distinct advantage, especially when multi-core render outputs get involved. That's certainly something you need to take into account, and it really does prove why spending a little bit more money now might benefit your current and even future use cases. And those advantages make their way into video editing and outputs as well, since both Premiere and Resolve do tend to see benefits when moving, once again, from 16 gigs to 32 gigs. There's simply more memory on tap, and the programs take advantage of that with smoother timeline scrubbing and better overall responsiveness. We also noticed that the 32 gig laptop had fewer dropped frames during 4K playback. But one area where that 32 gigs doesn't make much, if any, difference is in very GPU-centric tasks like transcoding and Handbrake. Meanwhile, gaming results also see the 258V taking an edge in both synthetic benchmarks as well as games themselves. Again though, these differences are likely due to the slight differences between CPUs, which allowed the 258V to run its integrated GPU at slightly higher overall clock speeds, despite it operating within the exact same power envelope. And it's likely that if we tested 10 of these laptops side by side, we'd see a huge range of frame rate deltas between the two Lunar Lake CPUs. However, some of these discrepancies could be due to the fact that the 256V's integrated GPU gets access to just 8 gigs of shared memory, while the 258V gets 16 gigs. And even with the slightly cut down performance, the Aura Edition is still very competitive against more expensive laptops sporting AMD's newest GPU like the ZenBook S16, all while sipping back less power. And look, I'm fortunate enough to have a desktop PC for my gaming needs, but at least with numbers like this, I'd have the option to play a lot of popular, less demanding games at reasonable frame rates if I just want to piece out for a little while during a business trip. And speaking of options, I want to touch on this a little bit closer to the end of the video because I'm sure some people are wondering what makes an Aura Edition an Aura Edition. How is this different from all of the other Yoga Slim 7 series laptops that are currently on the market? Well, first of all, and this is probably the most important thing for me because I love longer warranties and better support, you get premium care, which gives you so-called advanced support through the telephone or Lenovo Smart Care. And more importantly, if there's a problem, it includes at-home repairs if they're required. But other than that, think of Aura Edition features as sort of like a testing sandbox for technology and software you might see in future Lenovo laptops. On the software side, there's smart modes, which can be accessed through Lenovo Vantage or cycled through using Function plus F9. I didn't really find myself using any of these, but they modify non-performance related settings based on different use cases. For example, in the attention mode, you can automatically silence notifications and even block websites that would normally distract you. There's also Smart Share that's essentially an offshoot of Intel's Unison, and it allows you to seamlessly share photos between your smartphone and laptop by tapping it to the side of the screen. This is actually a feature I found myself using in a pinch because, hear me out here, and if you're your parent, you're gonna sort of sympathize with me. My Pixel 7a, it started acting up, and the last thing you want is when your parent is to lose pictures of your kids. Yes, they're backed up on Google Drive, but that's, trust me, that's a little bit of an iffy thing. So I needed to get my photos to the laptop as soon as possible. It's an Android device. Every 30 minutes, that slow-ass connection kept on timing out. So I used Smart Share to transfer, didn't time out once, and I got them backed up. Thank goodness. And look, even if you don't think any of these features are going to be of benefit to you, you have to remember the Aura Edition remains one of the least expensive Lunar Lake laptops currently available with the Ultra 7 256V or 258V. From build quality to battery life and performance in the thin and light category, this really is a solid device. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not. There's still some things I'd like to see, like an anti-glare screen, and the OLED panel should come to North America. An option for a factory installed 2TB SSD would be nice too. On top of that, I think a 14-inch version is desperately needed for people like me who are willing to sacrifice some screen real estate for a more compact footprint. And finally, with all of this real estate, I really do feel like Lenovo should be adding a larger capacity battery to this device. Even a ZenBook S14 that's significantly more compact has a larger capacity battery. And yes, Lunar Lake is a battery life champ, but this laptop, it could be even better. And speaking of ZenBooks, I gotta say, The S16 with Ryzen AI processors is an amazing alternative to the Aura Edition, but I'd avoid the HX370 model since buyers are reporting heat issues and there's still concerns about ASUS's quality control and support structure. Meanwhile, with the Aura Edition, you still get a lower price and the promise of an upgraded customer support experience. So ultimately, I think the biggest question in any review, especially one that has lasted as long as this one, is would I recommend the device that I have here in front of me? And I'm practicing what I preach here because I actually recommended the Aura Edition in the 32 gig version to my parents. Their older laptop that they're using as the only Windows device in their house is sort of on its last legs and they're looking for an upgrade. And they actually went out and bought exactly this laptop, and so far they've been really happy with it. They can't complain. But then again, their uses are a lot more basic than maybe some of your guys. Anyways, I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks, and I really hope that this video will allow you to make the best decision when it comes to buying either the Aura Edition or another thin and light laptop. Anyways, I'm going to see you guys in the next one. Have a great day, guys.